Thank you so much for coming this afternoon, and welcome to the University of Oregon in Portland. Is this anyone's first time in this building? Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, my name is Malia Tejedis, and I work for the University of Oregon. I'm based up here in Portland, so this is my office building. And I'm really happy that you're all joining us here this afternoon for this PNACAC Town Hall meeting. The other hat that I wear is I serve on the executive board for PNACAC, and I serve as the professional development now co-chair. Sarah Seaborg, sitting in the front, is my new co-chair, so we're now be serving in a dual role for PNACAC. And if you're not familiar with PNACAC, which I think most of you are or have at least heard of it. PNACAC is an organization that provides resources for its members to guide and empower students as they prepare for college admission. So we serve high school counselors, college admissions counselors, community-based organizations. A lot of different types of organizations are a part of our organization. So becoming a member, I just have to put in a little plug for PNACAC. Becoming a member and getting involved is really a great way to share your ideas with professionals throughout the Pacific Northwest and really all across the country. We're a regional affiliate of NACAC, which is the national organization for college admissions counseling. So if you are a member of PNACAC, you gain access to things like professional development, including the annual conference. Did anybody attend that last week? Wonderful. Quite a few. Okay. The annual conference, the Summer College Counselor Tour. Is anybody signed up for that in June? Oh, okay. And we also have 7 regional college fairs. We provide a lot of information and resources on the PNACAC website and the listserv. So if you are interested in becoming a member of PNACAC, if you're not already, feel free to chat with myself or Sarah afterwards. But here today, we're here to discuss supporting DACA and undocumented students through the college admissions process. And this is a topic that really comes at a time where I think a lot of us are asking that question, what can we do in our roles to make students feel comfortable and support them and provide resources to them through this experience. So this was a topic that was actually voted in by you. We sent out a survey back in December and we asked, what is it that you want to hear about? We were really excited that this was the topic that was voted on. So when those surveys come out in the future, please do, share your input, as it really does shape our professional development that we come up with throughout the year. So for the presentation today, what we'll do, we'll be here until about 3 o'clock. So we'll start off with a presentation. It'll last about 45 minutes. And then we'll take about a 10 to 15 minute break and then come back, rejoin, and then we will have some students come up and join us for a student panel to start off with. And then we'll have a couple of additional colleagues come up and end with a full panel where you can ask questions, share resources. We really do want this to be a collaborative discussion. So there are probably a lot of folks with quite a bit of experience in the audience, and we want to make sure everybody feels comfortable and confident in sharing their resources with each other. So if you didn't already at the beginning, did everybody get a piece of paper, a full piece of paper? Raise your hand if you did not. Okay. All right. And then did everybody, well, this isn't required, but we also have some small sheets of paper. The large sheets of paper we have an activity for. These small sheets of paper are for if questions arise that you think you might like to ask the panelists, but maybe don't feel comfortable asking them yourself. You're welcome to write down any questions that come up on the sheet of paper, and we'll collect those before the panel conversation. So be thinking through as the presentation's going on, if you have questions that come up that you'd like us to pose for you. And then just a couple housekeeping, well, just one housekeeping thing. The restrooms are out these doors to the left. So you'll kind of curve around and they're on the left-hand side out front. And the last thing is we will also be sending out a survey about this town hall meeting just to improve for future years. So please do, provide your feedback just to help us out with how we can improve this event in the future. And with that, did we get everyone with the paper? Oh, okay. A couple more. All right. Did anybody need the small pieces for panel questions? No. Everybody's got those. Okay. Do we need to go find some more paper? Okay. Thanks, Stephanie. Folks can also take some of their paper from the resources on the back if necessary. All right, thank you. Um, so I'd like to, at this point, introduce our presenters for this first portion of the session today. Tanya Sanchez from Portland State University and Jeanette Macias from Oregon State University will be presenting this first 45 minutes of the session. Tanya received her bachelor's and her master's degree from Portland State University, and she's served in the admissions profession for over 4 years. She currently serves as assistant director for multicultural recruitment at Portland State University. And as the daughter of immigrant parents, Tanya is very passionate about helping DACA and undocumented students throughout the admissions process. Jeanette received her bachelor's from Eastern Oregon University and her master's degree from Portland State University. She's served in the admissions profession for over 6 years and currently serves as Portland Regional Admissions Counselor for Oregon State University. Growing up in the U.S. as an undocumented youth, Jeanette understands the challenges and barriers that undocumented students face and feels passionately about serving them throughout the admissions process. So let's give a warm welcome to Jeanette and Tanya.
Welcome. Can you hear me? We good? All right. Welcome. How's everyone doing? Good. I'm glad to see everyone here. We'll give a round of applause to Malia for doing a great introduction of us. She made us sound amazing.
We didn't pay her for that, but so we're here today. One of the things that we just want to make sure that everyone understands is that this is we want it to be more of a discussion. We're not the experts, so please understand that this is something where we can all discuss and learn together. There might be things that you all are familiar with that we're not. So if you have any questions or if you want to add to any of the discussions, want to comment, please feel free to do so. This is a safe space. We're here to all learn, and I think that we probably learned a lot more while prepping for this actual presentation. So one of the things that we wanted to start off with is the reason that we're here is because we are trying to help a certain population, right, undocumented and DACA students, be able to reach their goals of going to college, right? And furthering their education. So we wanted to start off with something to kind of get things going and start thinking about what was our experience like. And I think it's important to reflect on our journeys and also helping understand maybe in what these students may be feeling. So we're gonna, if you have your papers, the blank pieces of paper, if you want to fold them into fourths, so quarters. So this is an activity. If you haven't gotten a piece of paper yet, just raise your hand and Malia will come over and give you a piece of paper. All right, and everyone has something to write with? Is that correct? Okay. So once you've done that, in the first box, you can write, you can draw, whatever you'd like. But in that first box, think of a time. When was the first time that you actually heard about college? So you can write the answer down, you can draw it out, be creative, whatever you want. We'll give you a minute or two to do that. So when was the first time that you actually heard about college?
Who was the first person you met that graduated college? So just make sure to number your boxes if you're doing them a little bit different. But the next box, just draw or write down who was the first person you met that graduated from college.
All right, for the third box, when did you know you actually wanted to go to college? So when was the time that you realized, like, yes, this is something that I actually want to work and actually do?
And who helped you, in the last box, who helped you get to college or pursue your post-secondary education goals?
All right, so if you want to turn to the person next to you, and the first person will share what they wrote down, and then we'll let you know when that time is up, and we'll switch. Okay? So go ahead and find the person next to you, or move to someone nearby, and discuss your answers.
I'm gonna blanket for a second.
Okay. One of the things is like saying, now that we know this, we know that there's
So should we add this to the end then?
No. I think what we should do is in transition to this, is saying that these students face this activity was not only for us to reflect, but understand that these are undocumented students or DACA students face additional challenges that we may face, and that we're here regardless of political stance. As educators, we have the responsibility to provide access and support as best as we can to our students. So in order to do that, it's important we understand key terminology and definitions. Okay, you want me to?
Does it feel like you have thoughts?
I have a thought, but I can't say it.
Do you want to write it down or do you want me to say it? So as what? Okay. Should we tell them to switch, or I think they might have done that already.
I'm give them. Okay, switch. If you've already switched, great, but if not, the next person. access and equity for these students as best as we can. One way to do that is one way to do that. In order to do this, it's important that we understand key terminology. So we have a shared link. So we have a shared link. Okay, so if you want to wrap up the conversations. Okay. This is actually good. I like that everyone was talking, and that means that you had some pretty good conversations.
So as we participated in this activity, some of you might have talked of the challenges that you face trying to get into higher education or pursue your post-secondary goals or dreams. And what we'd like to talk about or reflect on is that those undocumented students have additional hurdles that they have to face. And regardless of your political views, as educators, we have a responsibility to create access and equity for all of our students. And in order to do so, it's important for us to learn key terms, terminology, so that we have a shared language. So regardless of who the student is going to, we're using the same terminology from person to person, from the high school level on to the post-secondary education level.
So we're going to play a little game. This is very interactive. So if you were expecting to just sit down and have us lecture to you, I'm sorry, you're wrong. So we're gonna play a little game. It'll include some true or false questions as well as kind of pick the best answer. And you guys are gonna use your hands to give us the answers.
What do you think the answer is? So you're either gonna give up 1, 2, or
3, 4. You'll get the hang of it. All right. So this is a definition. So individuals who would have qualified under the DREAM Act are often referred to as such. Which of these questions are there? So if it's 1 for, okay, 2. Okay. 10, wow. 2, okay. Correct. So those of you that said 2, yes, so dreamers, dreamers is a term, it's more of an umbrella term. So you'll find that a lot of students will self-identify as a dreamer. So this could include undocumented students, DACA students, and it's a term that was actually originated when back in the early 2000s when they were trying to pass the initial DREAM Act. So a lot of times you'll have students that say, I'm a dreamer, or when they're talking to you, they'll say dreamers, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you understand if they're undocumented or if they have DACA. So this is just typically what students use to self-identify. All right. True or false? So, when accessing higher education, undocumented students are considered refugees and qualify for all refugee resources.
Y'all are too good. You studied before coming here, huh? So yes, the answer is false. Something we wanted to make very clear is that a student who is a refugee is not undocumented, and at times those two students are almost interchanged, saying that, oh, they're refugee, or if you're undocumented, you have refugee status. So refugees have to go through a certain process before coming to the States, and they are eligible for certain aid that undocumented students are not. So myself, by any means, I am not an expert on working with refugee students, so, but we're trying to learn as best as we can. But that's something we want to make very clear is that refugee students and undocumented students definitely fall within under separate categories. So school-aged immigrants who entered the United States without inspection or overstayed their visa and are present in the United States with or without their parents.
Hesitation. I like that. Peace to you too.
Okay, so that would be an undocumented student. So someone who has overstayed their visa, they're here in the U.S. Without legalization, so any record of being here legally. So we do have the reason we want to make sure that we do have students at times who come here with or without their parents. They might be living with other family members. Regardless of it, it just has to do specifically with their documentation status or lack thereof.
And just to add in, one misconception is that undocumented students tend to be Latino or Latina. That is not true. I'll be honest, there has been on one occasion specifically that I remember when a parent and a student were coming to me for help, and they said, I think we need the tuition equity. We need to fill that out. And I was a little confused and taken back, because even though they were describing their situation, never did it cross my mind. I believe they were from Russia, and never did it cross my mind that that student could be undocumented. So understanding kind of those stereotypes that we may fall into, even when we're constantly working with this and we're teaching you about it, right? It's important to not fall into those stereotypes. Students come from all over, and it's important to understand that this is not necessarily a cultural thing.
In order for a student to qualify for college resident tuition rates, a student must be enrolled in DACA.
Yes, this is in Oregon. Oregon or Washington, because it's going to be the same answer. We're still waiting for some hands, so we're not going to let you go. Everyone has to participate.
Oh, we need an answer. False. So a student does not have to be enrolled in DACA to be eligible for, to receive tuition rates within Oregon specifically. Or in Washington. There are some other states out there you can definitely look at to see which states offer a similar program. In the resource list that we provided, you are able to kind of look up what states do offer it. But specifically in Oregon, students do not have to have DACA in order to receive in-state tuition.
So what is DACA? So DACA is it stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and is a kind of administrative relief from deportation. The purpose of DACA is to protect eligible immigrant youth who came to the U.S. when they were children from deportation. DACA gives young undocumented immigrants, 1, protection from deportation, and 2, a work permit. The program expires after 2 years and is subject to renewal. So mind you that this definition, one of the things that's difficult is in this time, in this political climate, it seems that the laws are constantly changing, right? So the first part of the definition I had a little bit of trouble with, because one, we've seen cases where there have been students who are on DACA that doesn't necessarily mean that they're safe from deportation. So keeping that in mind. Typically, it doesn't seem like they're the targeted group, but if they happen to be in the wrong space at the wrong time, they can face deportation. So being aware of that. Also, the program expires after 2 years and it's subject to renewal. It seems like there's a lot of lawsuits going on at this time. There's a lot of uncertainty of whether or not students can or cannot renew their DACA permit. So being aware of that, I always encourage students to talk to their lawyers and or and there's a lot of nonprofit organizations that have legal services where students can go and get help if they are looking to either renew their DACA or enroll in the program. It's important to note that not everyone who is undocumented is a DACA recipient, so please be clear about that. This is something that you do have to apply for, so even if a student may be eligible and meet the requirements, it costs money. So not everyone who is undocumented necessarily has DACA. So typically when we're talking to students, you'll hear students that say, oh, but I'm DACA, or oh, I'm this. But it's really, the way I think about it, DACA is a work permit, okay? And this allows students to be able to work on campus as well, so.
Would anyone in the audience like to read this slide for me? Please. Out loud. Come on now. Oh, thank you. So yes, so this is a program, this was passed back in 2013, that would allow undocumented students to receive in-state tuition within public universities. So something to make clear is that there are private universities within the state of Oregon that might have separate policies, but we wanted to unify at the public level to make sure that these students kind of have a process to kind of, when they are applying, for us to be able to identify those students, since technically they would be residents of Oregon, to be able to pay in-state tuition, since before those students most likely were asked to pay international tuition, which was not affordable by any means. So as of right now, students do go through a process where they can find an affidavit. At each of our universities' websites, we have an affidavit available for students to fill out and submit directly to us, so we can process it and identify those students as tuition equity to make sure that they're paying those in-state rates. For the most part, I think the affidavit is pretty universal amongst the public universities within Oregon, and the student we can definitely help them fill out, but something we want to make clear is that we cannot fill it out on behalf of the student, because legally we can't. We just can't provide that legal advice. So they can come to us and ask for clarification on the affidavit, as well as counselors or teachers, but just know that we're not able to physically help fill it out for the student or tell them exactly what to check. We can just provide some suggestions moving forward. So. Yeah, so tuition equity has certain requirements in order to be eligible for tuition equity, such as the student has to have attended an Oregon high school for at least 3 years, have been in the Oregon public system for at least 5 years. They have to graduate from a high school and be able to provide, proof of graduation within the Oregon school system to be eligible for tuition equity. So there are students that might have entered the U.S. at a time where that means that they only spent a couple years in the high school system, so that would make them ineligible for tuition equity.
And I think another thing to add is that in Washington, they have something similar, but the requirements, you want to make sure, usually on the affidavit, it'll have the requirements that the students have to meet. And typically, this document does have to be notarized, keeping that in mind. And then one of the things that we're trying to work with, at least at Portland State, is that, as Jeanette mentioned, one of the requirements is that students have had to have graduated from an Oregon high school. So what that means on our end, when processing these students, is that they are I don't want to say labeled, but on their status, when they're admitted, it says non-resident. They're coded as non-residents, and we can't change that up until we have their final high school transcript. So we're working on our end to try to get that coded differently, because by law, according to tuition equity, one of the requirements is that they do have to have graduated from an Oregon high school. So I know that on at least I can at least say for PSU, and I know that some of the other universities are working on this to see how we can better process these students' application and code them earlier, so that way their financial aid and their status can show that they would be eligible for residency rates, so they can better plan and have a better idea of what that financial aid will look like in the fall. And I think that's what we're trying to do with the coding, right? Because one of the things that we've noticed, at least at PSU, is sometimes if they're coded as non-resident, they'll be awarded a out-of-state scholarship, and that confuses a student, right? And then when it changes, they're like, but I thought I had $6,000 because that's what it said. So we're working on that on our end, and we know that this is something. We're hoping that by this fall, it'll all get changed. The other tricky part that sometimes is out of our hands is the fact that with students filling out the ORSA or the equivalent to that, we're not always notified by the state what the funds will look like, so that we're not able to provide that. The only thing that usually we can provide is if a student applied to one of our scholarships and they were awarded, that'll pop up in their financial aid award. But aside from that, sometimes we have to wait from the state to see if they're actually going to be eligible for aid. So it does get tricky. The best advice I can give students in high school counselors that are working with these students is to keep in touch with the admissions office. Sometimes we have a little bit more insight, or we could provide a little bit more details, and at least be able to work with our financial aid office and seeing if we can provide a more detailed financial aid award, or see if there's other opportunities that a student might be eligible for, so we can at least guesstimate a more realistic financial aid award packet that the student may be eligible for. But sometimes we're not able to put that in writing until the end, once we know what the funds are for sure. All right, final one. So, ORSA, or the Oregon Student Financial Aid Application, provides Oregon students the opportunity to receive both state and federal financial aid. Eligibility is based on students' expected family contribution, and I know that there's another one in Washington as well that is the equivalent to this. So would this be true or false? I'm waiting for fingers. All right. So that is false. Kind of tricky. So students can get financial aid, but it is at the state level. It's not at the federal level. So please be aware that students, undocumented or DACA students, are not eligible for federal financial aid. So students, the ORSA is the equivalent basically to the FAFSA, or the application that students can fill out, and it's based on state aid.
So kind of talking about, well, moving on to the laws and regulations, because even though we're trying to create access, there are some barriers that undocumented students have to overcome. So as of right now, there's no federal law that bans undocumented students from pursuing a higher education. There might be some laws at the state level. So some states can come in and say that it's very limited, but thankfully we live in a state that's not the case. So things that we have to be very clear when we're assisting undocumented or DACA students, that we're not encouraging them to apply for things that might affect them later on when they are looking to pursue to gain residency or citizenship in the U.S. So undocumented and DACA students are not eligible to receive federal aid. So with DACA, how we mentioned, DACA students are awarded a social security number and a work permit. So just because a student is awarded a social security number under DACA, and they might go on to apply for FAFSA, does not mean that they should be accepting federal aid. Legally, they are not allowed to do so. If a student does and later on they're on the road to pursue residency, this can come back and affect them negatively. So you just want to make sure that if you're working with a DACA student, they're looking to apply for the FAFSA, because at times there's certain scholarships that might ask for an EFC. You just kind of want to make sure that you encourage them to touch base maybe with the legal team if they're able to do so before they go on and apply for anything that has to do with any federal aid. So we just want to make sure that you're clear with the students that just because you are a DACA student and you are awarded a social security number does not mean that you're eligible for financial aid, federal financial aid awards. Next is that they are not allowed to apply to participate in any federal programs such as TRIO. So that's another limitation. So we all know programs such as TRIO or CAMP, they are great programs, bridge programs for students to pursue higher ed, but unfortunately they're not eligible for it because they are federally funded. And study abroad. So once again, even though they're awarded certain things, they're not able to study abroad. It was the case before. They might have some special permission, but once again, since laws are consistently changing with DACA students, you just want to make sure that they're if interested in any type of program that they have to make sure to check in with the legal team so they're not getting into trouble, because there's a really fine line right now with DACA students that if they might get into something that might get them into trouble later. So just have them check in with the legal team. If they're just unsure and you're not sure, if you know someone that they can connect and that can give them a for sure answer of a yes or a no, we strongly encourage students to do that moving forward.
Does anyone have any questions or comments or anything like that? I know we kind of threw out.
Like their own lawyer, like, a legal aid. So we do have a legal team at our school. At times we're able to connect with them, but if they're able to have access to a lawyer, at times families are working with an immigration lawyer already. We did provide some resources on there that you can actually go onto a website to be able to find a list of immigration lawyers within each state that they can touch base with. At times they do it pro bono, but it really just depends on who you're working with. But we always just rather encourage a student to check in with a lawyer because as working in higher ed or even as counselors, I'm definitely not a lawyer. And once again, I don't want to jeopardize a student's position or even affect them in any way to be able to get that path to residency or citizenship in any way.
And one of the things that students pay for when they are at a college or university, at least at the public universities, I know that there are the legal services where they can ask lawyers there regarding questions regarding their legal status. I saw another hand. Yes, they are. So I know that at a lot of the universities, and again, this will vary. I'm talking on behalf of just kind of the public institutions. I know that private schools have scholarships that students can apply for as well. One thing that I always encourage students to do is to apply to the colleges and universities that they're interested in and apply to our scholarships. So as long as the scholarship is not federally funded, they can be eligible. So we have, for example, at Portland State, we have the Diversity Scholarship that pays 12 credits each term for up to 5 years. So that covers kind of their base tuition and fees for up to those 5 years. They can participate in some of those retention programs. So Ghana's is a retention program for first-generation Latino students, and they have one for each of the cultural groups as well. I don't know if you have some for Oregon State, but I think for the most part, all the colleges and universities offer scholarships for regardless of the student's status. So it's important that they don't limit their options beforehand. A lot of times students may be just set on one school, but it's important that they apply to multiple schools that they're interested in and apply to their scholarship, so that way they could see who's offering them a better financial aid award packages when their financial aid award letters come in the spring. Any other questions before we kind of give you a quick break and transition over to the panel part of it? That's a good question. And
maybe that's something that they would work with their advisor on, how to maybe go around that if they're legally not able to leave the country. Just touching base with their academic advisor. But once again, it's what's in the best interest of the student. If it's going to affect them in a bad way, then it probably would, and they're not able to work with an academic advisor, then hopefully they have a plan B in terms of education. But definitely always touching base with academic advisors to see how they can work with them. Yeah.
Yeah, and to also keep in mind that in Oregon, and I know that like this region is where the universities here, the public universities, were sanctuary schools. So we understand that. We want to make sure, and I think as part of being sanctuary is understanding that these students may have different needs and additional barriers, and working with these students to be able to facilitate that process in graduating. I'm not aware of any programs at the undergrad level that require students to study abroad, at least at Portland State. I know that at the master's level, for example, in the School of Business, that is one of the requirements, but I'm sure that there's things that they could do that would suffice that requirement and not having them have to study abroad. Any other questions? Okay, so we're going to do a quick few-minute break, so if you want to grab more.
So for this next portion of our session today, this will be a panel discussion. And one thing that I failed to mention at the beginning is that this session is being live broadcasted. So smile, you're on camera. We are live broadcasting for our PNACAC members who weren't able to make it, and there will also be a recorded version posted on the website afterwards. So if you'd like to share with colleagues or other folks who weren't able to make it in person today, please do so. So you can find that on the professional development website. And as we transition into this panel, we do just want to mention, of course, everyone in this room is here because they want to be here to learn more and support, students. And we just do want to be mindful of the fact that there are possibly folks that share different political opinions and backgrounds. And we just do want to be mindful of being respectful towards our panelists who, came to share their experiences with us. And we're really, really grateful that they're here with us today to share experiences and talk with us a little bit. So I will come around to collect any of the questions that you wrote down on your papers, those little papers. If anything did come up that you'd like us to ask, have those ready, and I'll walk around and collect those, and I'll pass the mic over to Tanya.
So I'm really excited to introduce our panelists. They are our PSU students. I get to work with them at different capacities. So sometimes they're giving tours, sometimes they're referring students to me, sometimes they're covering some of my events, which is I'm very grateful for. They are wonderful students, role models, and leaders. A lot of them are very active, and the fact that they're here, I think, says a lot. So Yoli is our graduate assistant in our office and works with campus visits. And we have Maria, who transferred into Portland State and is a student ambassador and also works in the front desk at our Welcome Center. And Fatima, I actually had the privilege of working with Fatima through the admissions process. So she was one of my students from McKay. And she has a great story as well, and she is a student ambassador and works at our Welcome Center, and has covered some of our events too. So I'm really excited to have them here. I'm gonna go ahead and kind of start this off. At the beginning, we did a activity of Journey to College, and I know that you all did that activity. So I kind of wanted to start off. I know I mentioned that we all have a story when it comes to talking about college, how we got to where we're at, and that transition from high school to higher ed. But we want to hear from you, because I know personally that there are some additional challenges that you may have faced. So if you want to kind of start off by introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about you, and then kind of what that was like, that activity, what that was like, and sharing your story.
So my name is Yolixpa Rios Martinez. Some people call me Yoli. Going back to high school, so I graduated from Aloha High School in 2011. The first time I told someone that I was undocumented at my high school was my freshman year of high school. My father was deported very early on, like in November, and I told my high school counselor, and I was in her office, I was crying, I was a hot mess, right? And she was very supportive. I was very lucky to have someone that could empathize, and that was, not an expert on this issue, but also not close-minded, and who was willing to do her best to help me out. And she was my counselor for the rest of my high school years, and she knew my story very well, and she supported me as much as she could. So that was kind of like my high school experience. I ended up graduating, like I mentioned, in 2011, and back then there was no tuition equity, so I ended up going to a community college. Like Tanya and Jeanette mentioned, I was getting international rates at the four-year public universities. So I ended up going to community college and eventually transferred to Portland State. And at the community college, I actually found a great support network of folks. I actually encountered a lot more dreamers, undocumented students, and we were pretty active as far as trying to get this issue known. A few times I was able to go to Washington, D.C. to advocate for the DREAM Act and comprehensive immigration reform the following year. And then DACA came around at the end of my freshman year of college. I eventually enrolled in that, so I'm a DACA student as well.
All right, my name is Maria Perez. I'm originally from Pacific City. Kind of half grew up in Oregon, half in Washington, but I consider Oregon my home state, so I'm happy to be here. I guess I graduated in 2013, so I am in my 5th year of college, 3rd year at Portland State. I also went to a community college. I actually never told anybody that I was undocumented in high school because I come from a very rural, white majority town, so I didn't really feel comfortable talking about it. So anytime anybody would ask me, I would always lie and say that I was a U.S. citizen because I felt like that was just better for my surroundings. Actually, it wasn't probably until 2 years ago that I first told somebody that didn't know me or was in my circle that I was undocumented. So this is a little weird for me to be here, but it was a little bit different. And so throughout high school, I always figured that I would move back to Mexico, and hence I've been here since I was 4 years old. Didn't really know how that would look like, but I knew I wanted to go to college. So in my ideal world, I was going to move back to Mexico and do that, even though I still don't know how to read or write Spanish very well. But then at the end or halfway through my senior year, DACA actually came out. Or I guess it was the beginning of my senior year because it was in June. And that's when I was like, oh, like maybe I can come to college here in the U.S. And I didn't really know how that would look like since I'm also a first generation. I was telling Fatima, which is next to me, that I actually don't know still anybody who's like graduated from college. So I'm still always like continuously like learning and trying to like find out new ways because I still don't have anybody to turn to. And my brother's actually graduating high school this year, and so I'm lucky to be that person for him. But like for me myself, I still feel like I'm still figuring things out sometimes. I also didn't get any help from anybody. Like my high school was very like didn't really have a set counselor, so that was also a struggle. And so I think everything that I did a little bit wrong just because I didn't know how to navigate that. So that was my experience, and then I like got my associate's degree in like a year and a half and then transferred into Portland State. And I wasn't until like I got to Portland State when I like started to get a lot more resources and like learning what like it meant to be DACA and like higher education and getting all these scholarships and learning about the ORSA. And so it took me a while. I'm still learning, but I think I'm starting to figure it out, and I feel like I can help people now too. But that was my experience to getting here.
Hello everyone, my name is Fatima Preciado and I am a DACA recipient. My family and I are originally from Michoacan, Mexico, but I grew up in Salem, Oregon. I enrolled to Portland State right after I finished high school, and Tanya was my admissions counselor. She helped me get there. For me, back in middle school, I was recommended into the AVID program. AVID is a college preparatory program that helps first-generation students get to college. For me, college was never really talked about. When my family chose to migrate to the United States, it was because of economic difficulties that we were facing back home. And so my dad saw it as an opportunity for him to get more access to better job opportunities, and so he decided to move the whole family over here. But growing up undocumented, it was very difficult and challenging. My parents struggled a lot to make just like ends meet. We had to worry about like having enough money for the rent, and it was just like constant survival mode. And so for them, they never really prioritized education in a way. It was more like, we're just trying to get by. And so for my mom, she didn't like the idea of me moving away. She wanted me to stay in Salem. She wanted me to just find a job. She's like, maybe you can get a job like at a store or something. But thankfully, through the AVID program, I realized that I could do something more, and that like there was more purpose to what I could do. Thankfully, my AVID teachers really believed in me, and after my 8th grade year of middle school, I knew that I wanted to go to college, and I viewed college as an investment for my future. And so I worked extremely hard. I was really involved in high school, did a lot of volunteer work. I participated in like sports and student government. I was also in honors, and I was taking AP classes, doing everything quote unquote what was like expected of me and what I was supposed to do. But it wasn't until my senior year that my undocumented status became a barrier. Because when I was applying for scholarships and when I was applying for colleges and universities, because of my status, I was excluded from receiving certain scholarships. Like I wasn't eligible. And I just remember feeling so defeated, just realizing that I had worked so hard, but because of this, I was denied an opportunity. At the end of my freshman year, I was able to qualify for the DACA program, and then I started working, and then the only thing that was in my mind was, how am I going to pay for school? Because at that point, I had learned that because I was undocumented, I wasn't going to be able to receive any federal aid. And so my constant worry was like, how am I going to get there? I know I want to go to college, but how am I supposed to get there? And so I was very determined. I pushed myself, and every morning I was going to my high school counselor, and I was asking for scholarships. I was like, I need scholarships. I need to get to school, but I don't have any money. And so thankfully with their support and also with the support of my AVID teachers throughout high school, I was able to apply, but I was still denied multiple times. I remember just applying for like 50 scholarships and only like 5 of them saying yes. And it was really hard because I had the grades, I had done the work, but I was denied the opportunity, and it just was really frustrating and very discouraging. But I didn't let it stop me, because I knew that it was an investment for my future, but also for my family. And I think I'm just really thankful that I was able to find Tanya and find that community at Portland State, because I was awarded the Diversity Scholarship Program at PSU, and because of that, I was able to pursue higher education. It's the opportunities that I have. PSU really opened the doors for me and became like my way into higher education, and so I'm just extremely thankful. And I'm also still curious to see how we can improve that process as well for other undocumented students trying to navigate their way into higher ed. So yeah, that's just a little bit.
Thank you so much to all 3 of you for sharing your stories. At this time, we'll open up the floor for questions. If you'd like to ask these wonderful ambassadors any questions, the floor is yours. You can probably, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so just like we're just working like crazy.
Yeah.
Get
So
funding and scholarships.
yeah, I started searching for scholarships since freshman year of high school. It was only until senior year that I was really more like determined to find scholarships. And so that was one of the biggest challenges for me, because I was in the AVID program, thankfully, and we kind of had like a goal at the end of the week. We had to at least apply for 10 scholarships. But sometimes I was searching for hours trying to find a scholarship that I would be eligible for, but there was only like 3. And I remember filling out OSAC, and I think there was only 2 that I could qualify, and I got 1 of them. And so I was like, okay, that's already a win for me. And then I just remember just having to constantly search for them. And that was one, I think, the most challenging and most frustrating parts for me, because my AVID teacher, she didn't really know how to support me, because I saw that all of my other classmates, that like they were finding scholarships instantly and they were applying, but it was taking me hours to even find one. Even though like I remember I tried to apply for the Ford, but at that point they didn't allow DACA recipients or undocumented students to apply for it. And I was just like, oh my God, it was just such a frustrating process. But I was also very active in my community, so I was volunteering with the Boys and Girls Club, and they had a scholarship, so I applied to that one. And then also through Kaiser Permanente, they had another scholarship. And so I was just like looking like locally in my community. I remember I applied to a Comcast scholarship. So I was just like trying to find anywhere really that they would offer a scholarship, like, and just like things that I was involved with, like through volunteer work and service and in my school. And then also just like applying to the scholarships in the universities that I was applying to also really helped. So you just really have to do your research. And I just wish there was a better way. I think there are now a little bit more, like we have ORSA, but it would be really helpful, like as high school counselors and counselors in college, to be able to provide, a list for students, so you don't have to do so much research. Yeah.
I just want to add on to Fatima. I was actually the second highest GPA in my class in high school, and I also tried to apply for the Ford Family Scholarship, because it sounded amazing, and I knew like I had like a very good chance of winning, and then I had to throw it out once I like realized it was for U.S. citizens only. And so a girl actually in my class actually received the Ford Family, and I like remember being like really upset, because like my GPA was like way higher than hers, and I didn't understand why like I couldn't do it if she like had like a lower GPA, and so that was very frustrating. But at the end of the day, I did gain about $11,000 in scholarships at the end of my senior year. Those are all gone now. Most of them were actually renewable, but I didn't really invest them very well when I was at the community college, and I figured, oh, I have this extra money. I should buy new books, because, like, what else am I supposed to use the money for? And I was getting these refunded checks, and I didn't know what to do with it. And so I, like, spent things that I probably shouldn't have bought. And so now I'm like, oh, I wish I had that extra money that I had, like, 2 years ago. And then I did have gone through a little bit of academic fall. So recently with the whole DACA situation, I have like struggled a little bit with my grades, and so I did end up losing a couple scholarships because of that as well. So those kind of stopped coming in, and so now I'm like finding myself depending more on my parents. But I do think it's possible to like eventually get all the scholarships you need. It's just like really hard to do. Like Fatima said, like you look at 3 scholarships and throw them all out, and then like find 9 new ones and realize that you can only apply for 2, and then like out of those 2, like how many other students are applying for them as well. So it's like very hard. Luckily, I am from a small community, and because I was one of like the top achieving scholars in our school and community, I was able to receive a lot of the local scholarships. But like if I tried to spread out a lot more than the like local area, I didn't really find anything.
And I'll add, so I think I applied for that Comcast scholarship too, my first year of PCC. But I ended up spending 3 years at the community college. My first year, I was able to receive small, $1,000 scholarships that ended up covering my first year. And I also want to add that I have an older brother who started the college journey 3 years before me. And he was a senior when my dad was deported, so he had to start working, and it took him a while to go back to school. But my mom was on him, like, you gotta take at least 1 class. So he ended up being my go-to person because he knew, how to apply to PCC, we all get accepted, yay. But he went through that process. He went through the process of registering for classes and all of that, so I kind of looked to him. And then I also have a twin brother, so the 3 of us were at the college age. My parents weren't going to pay, weren't going to be able to pay for any of that, but my mom was and still is a great support. No rent for her, so that helped out. I didn't have to commute too far, and I worked a lot. I worked a lot. Started working senior year, whatever I could find. Again, this was before DACA. I worked at like fast food places. I worked like 30, 35-hour weeks, and then I ended up. This was my first year of college. I ended up finding later a job on campus. I got involved with student government, and I found out that you could get tuition remission. That's the way they would go around things. You could not get paid hourly, but you could get a tuition remission. So I was involved with that and with a few programs at PCC. So I did find that support network where it was word of mouth. There were a few students who I knew that were undocumented who were a part of that. And then once the institution kind of like came down on them and removed the tuition remission piece, they went around that and created it a scholarship. So, there are ways that institutions have gone around certain things about the legality, Social Security and such. So there were ways that I was seeing higher education professionals be really proactive in how do we help these students, especially because my campus, Rock Creek, there were a lot of undocumented students, and as you may or may not know, Rock Creek has opened up the first Dreamers Resource Center in the state of Oregon. So, we were a pretty active community, and the folks who were up there listened. And that's kind of how I paid my first 3 years of the community college, by staying active, staying involved, working. And for graduate school right now, I am in the PACE program, so the same program as Jenna and Tanya that they went through. And like Tanya mentioned, I'm the graduate assistant, and if it weren't for this role, I don't know how I would be paying for school. My graduate assistant position covers my tuition, my 9 credits, and then I just pay the fees. So, I just cover the rest, and that's how I've been able to continue my higher education. And like a lot of us here in this room, I'm hoping to continue that support for undocumented and documented students, because there are disadvantages that we face being DACA students, but then I think about the students who don't even qualify for DACA. Like, there are so many undocumented students that cannot qualify for DACA, and they're at even greater disadvantages than people like in our situation. So it's those things where really federal legislation is necessary, because states do create policies to help these students, but typically, you have those residency requirements, and if you're moving from a state like Idaho that does not have those support services or policies that Oregon has, Washington has, California has, then we're still not serving all the students in those in that population. Yeah.
Hi, what are your majors and what do you plan to do after graduating?
So I came into PSU thinking I was going to major in social work, and then I switched to political science. After I finish my undergrad at PSU, I plan to attend law school and hopefully do immigration law.
I've gone through 3 majors. Hopefully this last one sticks. But I've actually started off in accounting when I was in community college, because I had shadowed an accountant during my junior project in high school. I was like, oh, that sounds easy and I'm good at math. It didn't turn out that's all you needed. So, but then I switched over to what everybody told me I should do. And figured that I would, and that was computer science, because I was that nerd who would fix everybody's computer in high school. Turned out I like computer science, but I didn't want to code for the rest of my life 24 hours. So I am now in computer engineering, which is a mix of playing with the hardware parts and doing programming as well, and I really enjoy that. And I'll hopefully graduate next year, and I'm thinking of staying in town and working for Intel, getting some experience, and then we'll see what goes on after that.
I finished my bachelor's with international global studies, which I don't think I would major in that again if I could go back. But grad school. My graduate program is in educational leadership and policy, like I mentioned, and 3 weeks to go until I finish. So someone hire me, please. I'm actually going through the job process right now. Again, my goals are to help students, underrepresented students in general that want to go to college, help with access, retention, and completion. And I'll let you know what happens. I don't know what I'll be. I'll let you know.
Recognizing the financial barriers are very real piece. But what would be a couple of other ways that you would recommend to colleges and universities to make sure they're providing good support for Dreamer DACA undocumented students? And what might be a word of advice you would give to one of those students as they look at that transition into college or university?
I guess I can go first. I think, considering that I didn't get any help, I would definitely recommend having a set spot or a set person that is identified for students to go to, because I feel like that was one of my biggest problems, was I don't trust most people to tell them my status, or at least I didn't 2 years ago or when I was applying. So I think having somebody who is recognized as helping students who are undocumented or underrepresented, on your admissions brochures and whatnot, I think that's something really big, because I know for the most part that's something that some students don't want to say out loud, and so having a known person for that is probably really good. And I know, like, Yoli mentioned, like, Rock Creek has a dream center. I think ideally for any dreamer, like whether you have DACA or don't, I think having that space and having that place to go connect to is really important, because at the end of the day, this isn't just a financial aid like situation. This is something that's like very emotional and like people don't want to talk about. And so knowing that there's other people that are there, and knowing where to find them specifically is like something really important, because it's not something we're out there like, hey, by the way, I'm a DACA student, are you? It's not something that we like go around saying. So I think sometimes it's very hard to find who to connect with, and I think that is one of my biggest problems. I still can't sometimes like talk about like the emotional process of being a DACA student very well, because it's like very hard to like communicate to somebody who isn't in the same situation. So knowing like where to connect with students who are in the same situation. And then a piece of advice that I give myself or like somebody else would be like, you're not alone. Like, honestly, like sometimes you feel like you're the only one in the school, but you're not. And I feel like it took me a long time to realize that. And so that's why it took me even longer to like reach out for help. But like assuring like students that you're not alone, and that, yeah, it might take a little bit and to figure things out, but it does work out at the end.
So let's say you were to come into my high school and talk with some of my undocumented students who wanted to continue their education after high school, but their parents or guardian families had legitimate concerns about supporting them. They want to, but having those fears and worries. What would you say to those students about how to have a conversation with their families that you all probably have?
Yeah, I think based on my personal experience, for my mom especially, it was really difficult for her to understand that I wanted to go to college, because her, the way that she viewed it was, we don't have the money for it. We're immigrants in this country. We're not even, we don't have the support. Like, we're never going to be able to do it. Like, you're being unrealistic. Like, you need to really, like, put your feet on the ground and stop dreaming. That's what she'd always say. Like, she said, stop dreaming. It's never going to happen. College is not for us, for someone like you. And that was really hard, especially because it was coming from my own mom. And then so you really have to be self-determined, and you really need to understand where you want to go and where you want to see yourself in the future, and kind of get into that mindset. And especially it's really hard, because I saw like my mom working hard every single day, and the guilt that like I should be at home like working instead and helping her pay the rent, or helping her pay the bills. That's always something that like even now I'm still dealing with, and even now that I'm having to have conversations with her, because for a lot of undocumented students, it's not that they don't want to go to college, it's just they don't have like the financial resource, and like sometimes the pressure, you have to stay at home. And for a lot of these students, they even drop out of high school early on and don't even graduate, and so because they're forced to work at a very young age. That was the same for me. And so honestly, I have gone back to my middle school when I started the AVID program, and I have spoken in their classrooms with some of these students, and it's really up to you. You really have to think about what you want, and really what are your goals. Where do you envision yourself? For me, the AVID program really taught me how to believe in myself, and taught me that like I was capable of doing something, especially right now with the political climate and just the uncertainty and the fear that a lot of these communities are facing. A lot of immigrant youth, you feel like your life is just being used as a political bargaining chip, and you have no agency, you have no control of what's going to happen. You're working so hard, but you never know what's going to happen tomorrow, if you're going to be ripped away from your community, everything that you worked for. And so it's definitely a challenge, and it's definitely something that's always in the back of your head, but you really have to be self-determined. And sometimes you're going to have to work harder than everyone else, because that's how it was. Like, that's how it was for a lot of immigrant youth. You just have to, do the extra mile, take the extra step. And I know it's challenging, I know it's hard, and it's not the best situation, but I think if you're determined and you know what you want, then you just really have to work hard for it.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
No.
I just want to add that I actually, my parents, like, since I can remember, have told me that I have to go to college, like, no matter what. And so I think I'm, like, on the opposite boat. And so I always had the support. But for my parents, it was like, if like you have to like say something that puts everybody else in danger, that's fine. And so I think for some people, like, it's not like that because it's not like always that same situation. But I've like actually talked to friends about this, and I feel like just showing them like the physical copy saying, look, they don't ask anything about anybody except for me. Like, it's me, and like, I understand you're scared for me, but like, it's also like my journey and I have to go through it just like you went through your journey to come here. And so I think if you like put them in those like sort of shoes and like situation, I think it'd be easier for them to understand. Yeah, I've kind of helped a lot of friends go through that just because I ended up being the first person people go to talk to from back home, because I don't know if it's those $11,000 that I gained, but but people just like think that I know everything, and it's like been hard because like I feel like pressured to know everything for them, even though I don't know anything. But I think it's just like reassuring them that it's not asking them anything about themselves. It's more about you, and like I guess just making sure that they know it's like what you really want.
All right, we had a question come in from the audience. What is the most helpful thing a high school counselor can do in his or her interaction with an undocumented student to build a relationship?
One thing that I would add, we've been talking about like how they can support us, but I think that counselors need to also step back and think about how they can support like the families and the communities, because we all have parents. These students that you're going to be working with, they have parents who, like you mentioned, some of them might be fearful of them going on to a college journey. Like my mom is sometimes she'll call me. She's like, "Be careful! I heard that ICE is on the max," and I'm like, "Okay." So things, again, it comes out a lot. Like my mom has a lot of fears. Even, I don't commute that far. She has these fears, and she's, she can have them. She has a right to have them because, but something that I think that counselors need to understand is that these students are not only thinking about like their futures and their lives, they're thinking about their family's safety as well. So kind of thinking about that in that perspective that it's a collective process. A lot of us, we have cultures where our family connection is very strong, so we want to make sure a lot of us are doing what we're doing because we want to eventually give back to our families, to our parents. So just kind of thinking that these students are, yes, they want college education, but they also are worried about their families, their siblings, or anything that could happen, because that's something that growing up, like, especially since DACA came out, even a little bit before then, where you hear folks that say that these students, these dreamers, are here at no fault of their own. It's their parents' fault. That's just ridiculous. Like, yeah.
I also think that the first step in establishing that relationship is for a counselor to do is to demonstrate trust, because that's something that's really hard. You don't just, you're taught in your family to not talk about your status. You're not supposed to mention that. So if the student feels that they can trust you, I think that's the first step in establishing a strong relationship. And then I think just also constant motivation and reassurance, because there's so many doubts going in your head when you're like even thinking about like telling someone about your status. So just constant reassurance and establishing trust, and then just really motivating the student. Because in high school, I remember I visited my high school counselor like every morning, like 7 a.m. I was in his office and I was like, I need a new list of scholarships to apply to. And so he knew that I was coming in. And so I knew that I could trust him. I knew that I could count on him to have that list for me. So it's really, the counselor really has to show that initiative. And sometimes the student might be a little bit scared and won't necessarily reach out to you because you have, at least for me, it was a lot of like self-doubt and a little bit of, I kept wanting to give up constantly a little bit, and because of my counselor, he kind of kept me going, kind of kept me pushing. He's like, I know it's hard because like after receiving so many rejection letters, you start thinking, is it even worth it? Am I ever going to get there? And so you kind of start losing a little bit of motivation, and you feel like the whole system's against you. There's so many barriers you have to overcome, and so you're just like, how am I ever going to make it? And so it's really important, like as a high school counselor, as an admissions counselor in college, you play a very important role. And sometimes that's the only person that you can count on. I remember when Tanya visited my high school and I was turning in my affidavit form, I was turning it into her, and then I also submitted my final graduation transcript from high school, and I was like, okay, I have everything ready. And then I got an email later on saying that it was in process and that I was being charged out-of-state tuition. And I was like, what is happening? And so I remember just emailing Tanya, and she's like, no, I'm getting it processed, like everything's going to be okay. But just I needed that constant communication from her, and just like the understanding and constant motivation. I think it's really important for students to receive, because sometimes they're not getting that support at home, they're not getting that push from their own families.
So you kind of mentioned trust. I think one of the questions, or one of the things that's hard for us as whether it's admissions counselors or high school counselors working with students, is that you may not feel comfortable, I mean, rightfully so, disclosing, right, the status. When is it appropriate for us to ask? One, I know that for me, sometimes it's easier. Sometimes I have to. It's a guessing game almost. Like it's like, do I ask now, or should I wait? Should I hold off? Or sometimes students tend to describe the situation, but not actually say it. In your experience, when is it okay for us to ask? I guess it would be your advice. How can we ask students when they're not self-disclosing necessarily? When is it okay to ask? Does it matter if they don't, if the counselor or admissions counselor maybe doesn't? One of the things that I've noticed is that the Latino students tend to disclose a little bit easier to me as a Latina versus some of my other colleagues or people that work in the field. Can you kind of, I guess, answer that question if possible?
For me, it's been very direct. Like if you think that I am like undocumented or I'm a DACA recipient, if you just say, hey, can I ask you a question? You don't have to disclose, and if you don't want to answer, you don't, and we won't talk about it again. If you start saying that like right at the beginning, I immediately know you don't want to know just because you want to know, or because like you want to like do something about it, or like if you're like starting with that, I guess it like builds a little trust and tells me that you're just genuinely curious or like want to help me in some way. And so like by giving me that option of not having to answer your question, I will like immediately be like, okay, yeah, like go ahead. And like because you gave me that option, I will most likely disclose to you. But I do agree that with Tanya that sometimes it is a little easier to like or at least to me, I think it's a little easier to talk to somebody who is Latino or a person of color, and just in general, to tell them my background before I tell anybody else. But I feel like if we're friendly, or like we've talked a couple times and built like that, like sort of friend and not just like colleague or work type of business like relationship, if you've asked me before about like my personal life, then I will like still open up. It just takes a little bit more time, and I guess just like feeling that out, like is the student willing to tell you on the first basis, or do they need to like talk to you a little bit more like that's not related to that situation, and more of a like I'm your friend and I'm here to help type of situation.
Follow-up questions about that, go ahead and talk to me one-on-one. Like, I haven't actually asked for feedback about that because nobody's taken me up on it, but does something like that seem like just kind of
I think that would be a really good way of addressing it, because a lot of students won't, want to talk about it. And so if they feel like you have addressed it in a presentation, I feel like they would be more comfortable going up to you. And something that like my avid high school teacher didn't do that I wish she would have done was have a separate list of scholarships for undocumented students, and then for like scholarships in general. It's just always constantly having to I feel like as admissions counselors you have to always think that there could be someone with that status, and so just always making sure that you include that information in those resources for those students as well, and really implementing a space where they can go. We had like a really cool board outside of my avid classroom where like they listed different scholarships, and so like having a section for general and then having a section for undocumented as well, having it on your like websites where students can find that information if they don't feel really comfortable going up to you in person and like telling you, just having it available, that's visible and it's there, and that's your resource. Yeah.
So at this point, I want to pause. I know we have so many great questions, and we're going to keep these ladies up here on the panel. We'd also like to add a couple additional panelists to speak a little bit from their perspectives, from a community-based organization perspective and the high school counseling perspective. So we really want to thank you so much. Again, I think I can speak on behalf of the entire audience for sharing your stories and your experiences. And don't go anywhere. But I'd like to invite also up to the panel Liz Perez-Diaz from Beaverton High School counselor, and Jonathan Colon from a community-based organization here in the Portland metro area. So Liz and Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind both just introducing yourselves and maybe just sharing what your experience has been working with undocumented DACA students.
Sure. Hello. My name is Liz Perez, and I work at Beaverton High School. This is my 4th year at Beaverton, and so before then, I used to wear a lot of hats and have different types of jobs. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
Hi there. My name is Jonathan Colon. I'm the director of Centro Prosperidad and the economic arm of Centro Cultural de Washington County. It's a new role for me. For the prior 15 years, I was the Vice President of Business and Economic Development for the local Hispanic Chamber. And in both of these roles, I'm working with the community on helping our families access their future, whether through self-employment, workforce. Lots of dreamers were part of my conversations for the last 20 years. And those conversations, I'll add some about that in a minute.
All right, questions for any of our panelists up at the front? We'll take about 10-ish more minutes for the panel, and then we'll start to wrap things up. So any questions?
Did anybody find the list of Malda scholarships helpful at all?
Yeah, I used that. It was very helpful. It was very long. Well, not as long as I wanted it to be, but it was like some of it had like information that wasn't in relation to it. So maybe cleaning it out would be really good. Some of them were really outdated, and when I looked them up, like the website was like nowhere to be found. So just constantly updating that.
This question is for Jonathan. What are some resources, or what are some of the programs that your organization has for these students in particular, and can you talk a little bit about that and how they can go about finding it, or how we can point students in that direction?
Great. So there's a lot of resources per se. I think the labeling is sometimes what gets us confused and not necessarily accessing them, right? We've heard of a lot of things today. One of them was we were told that we couldn't use federal funds. One of the things that we forget to do is to check if our programs who we think are federally funded actually have federal funds to qualify them to disqualify. So self-selecting ourselves out of conversations sometimes is the worst things we could do. Our organization does a couple of things. One of the areas is workforce. So we're having conversations about planning making those career choices. But that becomes a hardship for people who don't have social. So sometimes self-employment becomes an option. And one of the things that's very important, and it was touched early on here, it was treating the entire family. This is a community and an entire family sort of experience. So looking at self-employment, looking at the difference between a W-2 employee and a 1099, looking at those skill sets, looking at financial literacy to stabilize and help families make those decisions about higher education, because the first part of it is understanding where that money is going to come from. And sometimes we're too busy trying to get the day-to-day out the door that don't have the time or the opportunity to sit with someone and sort of reflect where my family is, what I'm trying to get, what my children want. And we provide those conversations. We provide those one-on-one. It's really hard to have conversations about finances and people's futures and dreams within an open sort of environment. Lots of us tend to do much better in close. So I'm very appreciative of these young ladies who've been very sharing and very vulnerable with us. So we do workforce, self-employment. We do have a fund called an Esperanza Fund, and that works with trying to support DACA. DACA funds is what we're sort of labeling it. It's sort of to apply or reapply, not that you can reapply at this point, but also to do immigration sort of relief. So if the family has an interaction that is requiring some financial assistance, there's a small fund. We are one of many other resources, like each one of you, trying to put our little grain of sand into this ocean that we're trying to battle. So as you are sort of out there sort of working through these things, we have access to health care for those who are documented or undocumented. When you asked a conversation earlier about how to make yourself available and open to have the conversations, I think it's just neutralizing and always making that distinction. For those who are documented, this is this is one path, and for those who don't have your social, you could use your ITAN. Those levels of conversation starts to also open up that conversation. State of Oregon has a program called the IDAs, Individual Development Accounts, Safe Match. You can save up to $3,000, get matched by $9,000. There's a federal match to that, and there's a state match to that. It's about $2,000 for every $9,000, but the state can fund it by 100% with state match dollars. So there are programs like that. The question is, how do we maneuver the system to sort of help our young people go through the system? So our organization is committed to sort of sitting down with individuals and looking at where they're at and looking at paths and inroads. There's also, we have a youth program for 17 to 24-year-olds who may not be in the path of college because they have to make these decisions along the way, that they have to go into the workforce. And perhaps the best thing that we can do for them is put them on a track on a better paying job so they can get back to the college at a later time. So there are things like that that our organization, but we're just one organization doing a little bit, and we need more people sort of supporting this community in different. We are downtown Hillsborough. Mi casa es su casa. Anybody who shows up, you will be served. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. I think it's about having honest dialogue, helping people sort of reflect and develop a plan, and sort of having that honesty to look at both the successes and the challenges that these families, lots of the time the emotional, mental health on the financial sides of the equations is what lots of time gets in the way, sort of shadows sort of the ability to sort of see clearly. And in our space, we get to talk about that, and we attempt to sort of deal with it holistically, because it's not just the young person trying to, it's also all the things they leave behind that is so intertwined into who we are as people in a culture.
Thank you. This question is for Liz. Liz, can you share maybe, if you can remember, your first experience working with an undocumented or documented DACA student? What did that look like? How did it feel? And how has that changed since that first experience?
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, I had different positions before coming to counseling. I used to be at Mount Hood Community College. I was a TRIO advisor. And so for TRIO, it's a federally funded program, like they mentioned earlier. So it's meant to help students that are first generation or low income. And so when I was the advisor for TRIO, there was many students that they would come to me to ask for help, but they weren't able to apply because it's a federally funded program. It asks for social security numbers. And so my first experience was making sure that we knew where those students were and not deny services, but obviously give them the services without having them be counted. And so, you know, at that time, I think it was, since I was at the schools only for a couple of days out of the week, it was really different. Like my role was really different than now because I didn't have as much access to them as I do now. So that was the difference mainly. And also, again, just like the laws changing all the time and just making sure to keeping up on what are the best resources and best guidance that we can give to the students depending on the time that you're meeting with them. And so again, so at that time it was limited in regards of time, but now that I'm at a school, definitely I have more control in regards to systems and how to place them so the students can actually find those resources or find me or find someone within our department that can be able to help them and guide them to where they need to be. And so, and just creating those systems within our schools, I think is very important, and that's how the students are gonna be more, well, obviously supported, but also, you know, they're gonna meet the goals, whatever goal that they set for themselves. So that's the difference, that I can actually make some of those systemic changes within the school. If I'm seeing that my students are we're not meeting their needs, then I can actually advocate for that to be changed and, you know, gather data and making sure that we can show that to whoever we need to so we can get the funding or we can make structural changes within our department so we can help the students the best possible way.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you guys for sharing. I much appreciate it. So Fatima, you mentioned that you had a really good connection with your high school counselor and you guys had good connections going into college. How was that transition and what can we do on the college side to help facilitate maybe some more of that transition? Finding someone, having someone, and finding a new someone.
Through the Diversity Scholarship Program at PSU, you have an advisor that you can go to and you have like check-in meetings. And so it's kind of like a built-in retention program that the university offers, and then you also get paired up with a mentor. And so they're usually an older student who have already experienced the first couple of years in college, and they kind of, walk you through the process, support you academically, and then also just like with any personal issues that you're going through. With my advisor through the Diversity Scholarship Program, I really benefited a lot because she's able to, again, just provide, I'm able to talk to her about what I'm going through, especially with DACA and like the whole like determination of the program, just feeling the uncertainty. And I was very worried. Thankfully, PSU is a sanctuary campus, and we had our president come out and publicly state that, but it was still, I wasn't finding really the resources that I needed. It was really hard trying to explain my situation to someone who, they could try to understand, but were not really in my shoes. And so I took kind of the initiative alongside with two of my other of my classmates, and we began the process of creating our own student group for self-identified undocumented students. And so alongside with Maria and I and three other officers, we were able to establish Dream PSU on campus. So it's now a resource for students who identify as undocumented. And one of the biggest components of the student organization is to provide that emotional support, and then also provide that resource, like financial resource for students. So we are we're kind of helping each other. If I find out about a scholarship, I tell the other officers, and so we kind of are building our own little community. And it's important that we have the support from like faculty and a lot of our advisors and things like that. But it had to be done because we were feeling like as students that like there wasn't enough for us, and so just really we kind of took the initiative and started that process.
I think we have time for about one more question. Maybe two if they're quick. Yeah.
So these three are examples of really exceptional students, both in high school and then coming into college. But Liz, working with high school students, how are you working with students who may not have the same level of motivation, but some of the additional challenges that these women discussed? And then what can we on the college admissions side do to better support you and our other school counselors? Sorry, that's not your question.
So I think every student that comes into high school has a goal, regardless if it's not just to go into higher education. Perhaps they don't know what that looks like. I think we make assumptions a lot of the times that when students come in into our offices or when we ask them the questions of what they see in their future, they might be limited in regards to what the future might look like. And so I think exposing them to what it could be, like what resources are available to them, and just making sure that that's not just a one conversation type of, one-time conversation, that is consistent, and that they don't just come to me, to Ms. Perez, and she's gonna tell me this, conversation in regards of it. I think it's a systemic change that needs to happen in regards of our buildings that are working with every student. And if they get to hear it not just from me, but also from my colleague and from my teachers and from our principal, I think it opens up the idea of like, okay, yes, this is a supportive place where I can actually, regardless of whatever goal I end up doing, these are the resources that we have available for every student. And I think sometimes, perhaps before, it wasn't so out there in regards of like, here are the resources, or and so I do know that in some of my colleagues and in my school, we need to make sure that it seems like they mentioned earlier. So every presentation we have, these are scholarships that are available for students that can receive federal funding, and these are scholarships that are for students that might be DACA or undocumented. And so we make sure that in every step of the way, our presentations, or when we come into our students and we gather their trust, we identify them very early on so we can make sure that we're prepared in regards of resources and what to give them so they can be ready. So that's part one. The second part for higher ed, I mean, I think we all understand that these are big systems that we're hoping that, will change. But I mean, yeah, in regards of, I'm really happy to hear that there's some things happening in regards of the affidavit, to changing some of, the status of a student, because that is a roadblock, right? And so those are things that students are trying to get away from, or at least get some help on. And if they continue to be feeling defeated since the beginning of like, how am I supposed to make a decision to go to higher institution when I don't even know if I'm going to be able to afford it, it's really difficult to ask of a student that it's always living in limbo of not knowing, like the unknown. Like that is so scary to not know. And for them to be asked over and over to, or just continue to do the right thing, or just continue to wait, or just continue to work hard. Like even those conversations are hard for me sometimes to have, because I'm just like, I'm so frustrated sometimes in regards to how systems work. And so I just tell them, like when you get to the job that you really want, like keep fighting for some of those systems to dismantling them because they're really difficult. So in regards to higher institution, I just think like, yeah, just keep battling some of those things that you do know that are roadblocks for amazing students to continue to reach whichever goal they want to do.
And I actually would like to add to your question. So I think that, and this is more of, I know we're here to talk about how to support undocumented and documented students that want to pursue a higher education, but I think that like we all know, not every student has that goal to go to college, and that's, you know, the great thing about the DACA program that came out, that it addressed this population, but not only the students, right? Because it allows folks that, you know, decided maybe not to go to college for whatever reason. Maybe some of them would rather, you know, maybe open up their own business one day or go to through a different avenue. And I think it's important to recognize that some undocumented and documented students don't have the dreams to, not the dreams, but like the desire right now to go to college, and that's okay, and that there are ways, just kind of having those conversations, okay, just like you would with any other student who maybe doesn't want to go to college. What is it that you want to do? Where do you see yourself? And then, you know, that's where the community organizations that you might know about that can help them, you know, pursue their goals outside of higher education. Because I have friends who are undocumented and documented that chose not to go to college. Some of them ended up going back. You know, my older brother did not really start out in college. He ended up going back. But just being very realistic that a student might not have that in mind at the moment. Maybe later on it will come about. And if they don't, then just being able to support them for whatever other decision they make to continue, you know, giving and contributing. And that's also, I think, that we need to dismantle that perception that the ideal dreamer is the valedictorian, you know, the student who takes, you know, AP classes, et cetera. I think that we need to celebrate those students as well, but not every student is going to be the ideal dreamer. Not every undocumented youth is going to want to go to college, but giving them the space to still be a part of the community and support them outside of higher ed.
All right, let's put our hands together. A big thank you to our panelists. Really, we wish we had more time because I think there are a lot more things we could talk about, but we thank you so much. Tanya and Jeanette are just going to wrap up the presentation really briefly. And I just also want to add, as my last mention, again, we will be sending out a survey, and we'll also be sending out these resources in an email to those of you who attended afterwards. So we'll bring the presentation back to Jeanette and Tanya. Thank you.
Okay, so now really quickly, we'll also stick around if you have any questions afterwards. Some of you might need to leave right away, but we'll be available just in case any of the questions come up. But what can we do in our roles to kind of continue to help this population? So something we could do is just help educate senators and representatives about Dreamers in DACA. Not necessarily, just to kind of talk about or share stories of students that you work with and how important it is. So usually sharing with senators and representatives stories of specific students tend to have a bigger impact than just kind of saying yes or no, or that you just care about this, but having a reason why and specifically who it's affected. It's encouraged. We talked about families, but it is really important to involve families in the whole process because they want to be in the know just as much as the students, right? Because once again, there is a risk for them disclosing certain information. So just including the family in the process is really important. It's not just about the student, it really is the family. At times they're going to have to the student carries a lot of weight, so even with the translation portion of it. So if you know someone who is bilingual, reach out to us. We're happy to help. Or if you're bilingual yourself, just know that there are people who are willing to help, not only the student, but the families as well. And collaborating with colleges and universities. So I know the students kind of suggested that if there's someone directly within the Office of Admissions who worked with DACA or undocumented students, typically there are, and you can find who that person is on the website. So, for example, myself and Eddie Rodriguez are on the website for undocumented students to specifically answer any questions. So the student does not have to self-identify, but if you have any questions specifically how Oregon State works with that population, we can directly answer that question. And I know that's the case for U of O as well as Portland State, and chances are some of my other colleagues who are here from other universities probably have that information available on their websites as well.
Just to add on to that, one of the things that's really helpful is when sometimes we have a lot of counselors that reach out and say, I'm working with this student, and for us to be able to know that and be able to share resources. Sometimes resources can change. Sometimes there's additional resources that maybe weren't there that previous year. So always keeping in touch with us and asking us those questions is really helpful to us as admissions counselors and better serving our prospective students.
And something else to add about that, unfortunately, at times just because a university offers one thing doesn't mean another university will, but at least we can connect students to, if they're looking for a specific program, we can at least point them in the right direction. But really important is, well, it's really important not to profile. So unfortunately this year I worked with a student who the counselor automatically thought they were undocumented and just told them that their only resource was ORSA, even though she was specifically mentioning that they were born in the U.S. So even though their parents might have migrated here, they were a U.S. citizen. So if the student discloses or not, just providing resources that we know of as best as we can up until that information is disclosed.
I think to add on to that as well is understanding where our personal bias lies, right? Not assuming that the student should go to a community college first or should go to a four-year institution first. Really providing students with all of their options and resources and kind of, going through that process with them and saying, these are the pros, these are the cons, this is what you can get out of this is what you can get out of that. I think another thing is also the question that sometimes students may ask or parents might ask or that other colleagues might ask is, what's the point, right? If they can't, what's the point of them going to college if they may not even be able to get a job afterwards? Or what's the point of them going through all this education if we don't know, what's going to happen? And I think it's fair to say that we don't know what's going to happen to anyone, whether you're documented or not. I think an answer to that is also, if there were to be, we can't assume that all these students will stay undocumented or documented for the rest of their lives, right? We don't know what paths or what laws may be passed, and I think one thing that I feel is safe to say is that it's typically those who are students or that do have kind of that foundation may have a better chance of finding a way to a pathway to either being a legal resident or citizen. So understanding that we don't know, we can't foresee the future, but education is the one thing that that cannot be taken away from these students, whether they stay here or whether they end up going to their country of origin. This will better prepare them and can provide different avenues in the future for them to be successful wherever it is that they end up at.
And normalizing ORSA, so getting in the habit of whenever there's a financial aid night, making it financial aid / ORSA. So then that way, you're not singling out any students. They can still participate in financial aid nights, apply for scholarships. So just kind of making it a habit whenever there's a financial aid night, just adding ORSA to that as well.
And making sure that they know what documents to bring, right? So regardless, like maybe having a worksheet, and I believe we had that through Gear Up, where it's a worksheet that says, okay, if you're filling out FAFSA, this is what you'll need, and on the other side, this is what you'll need for ORSA. So there's no distinction. Students don't feel like they have to necessarily state whether or not they are, what their status is when filling out these applications.
And preventing notary fraud. So when we mentioned the affidavit, students have to get that notarized, and if the student needs to get notarized and you know someone you can trust, referring them to that student, because students putting themselves in a vulnerable position, because not only do they have to tell the notary, undocumented students do not have a form of ID, so they need to kind of bring in another witness. So that might be involving a lot more people than what they want to disclose. So right now we're in the Tanya, this is totally Tanya's idea. She has become a notary, and I'm in the process of becoming a notary as well. So when I'm working with students, we can go ahead and just help with that process.
Yeah, I have a suggestion for that. Our school registrar is a notary as well, and our school pays for it. Every year, she just gets it done, and she doesn't charge students or anything. So I literally just walk students over to our registrar and get it done.
Yeah, so that's our hopes, is eliminating that barrier, that when we're working with the student and they fill out the affidavit, we can notarize it right then and there free of charge.
Yeah. So for all our other colleagues, I encourage you that if you work for a public university to have someone in your office to be a notary, so that way when we are doing instant admissions or application workshops, students, there's not an additional barrier for those students. And one of the things is sometimes the schools may have notaries, but I've run into situations where that notary will not sign it or stamp it because the student hasn't graduated high school. Anyways, so just to avoid any additional barriers, and as our mission to provide further provide access, I think it's a great idea. It's super easy to do, and it can not only help us on the admission side to move things quickly, but also make it safer and let the students know that, hey, we're here and we're trying to help and that we care.
So this is a way to kind of identify yourself in your office to putting this up. So students know. At times they might recognize this and know that you're an ally or that there's someone, you are someone they can trust by putting this up in your office, or a way just for the student to be able to see this. So this is kind of the Dreamers logo saying that, hey, I'm here to help Dreamers and I'm willing to help any way that I can. So we found this just online. If you want to print this off,
Google it.
Google it. And this is also a resource. So we provided a sheet of resources. We've discovered a lot of them are just for adults. But this is a great website for students and families to be able to find some additional resources to help them with that college search process moving forward. And here's our contact information. So if you have any additional questions for us afterwards, you are more than welcome to contact us. Like I said, we work really closely together. So I know even though Malia's a duck and I'm a beaver, we're here to help students reach their higher education goals. So chances are that we're going to reach out to each other. So if we can't answer the question, we are not hesitant to reach out to somebody else saying that, hey, can you help me out with the student? Or it might be best if you contact such person. So don't hesitate to answer those questions. If we don't know, we're going to make sure that we find that person who is able to do so. So thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to turn it back over to Malia.
I just want to give a round of applause to Jeanette and Tanya for this presentation. We also want to thank Adrienne Enriquez from Gear Up. She was really integral in a lot of the content for our presentation. So thank you to Adrienne. And thank you to all of you for being here this afternoon. We'll stick around.